I was standing on my front porch in the freezing wind holding my 3-day-old son when I realized my key wouldn't turn in the lock. When I finally got my husband on the phone, his voice was a rushed whisper. "Take a cab to a hotel. My mother has a migraine and she can't handle a crying baby right now." But later that night, when I checked the doorbell camera, I saw him welcoming a beautiful woman inside playing the role of a successful bachelor. He thought he could just erase me to clear the way for his new life. But he severely underestimated me. Have you ever been betrayed by the person you love the most? Hit subscribe and keep watching. The automatic sliding doors of Mercy General opened, letting in a blast of harsh November wind. I pulled the fleece blanket tighter around Leo. He was exactly 3 days old. 6 pounds, 4 ounces of fragile warmth resting against my chest. A nurse stood beside my wheelchair holding a discharge clipboard. She looked down at me, then scanned the pickup lane. It was lined with idling SUVs, husbands loading overnight bags into trunks, grandparents holding helium balloons. "Is your ride here, sweetie?" she asked. "He's on his way." I lied. My voice was steady, but my stomach twisted into a tight knot. Julian had promised to be here at noon. It was now 3:15. I ordered a lift. The driver, an older woman with kind eyes, helped me secure the infant car seat. As the car pulled away from the hospital, I leaned my head against the cold glass of the window. My body ached. The physical toll of labor was heavy, but the exhaustion in my mind was worse. I watched the bare trees blur past and thought about the last year. I had played my role perfectly, the quiet, supportive wife with the modest office job. I wore off-the-rack sweaters and packed his lunches. I shrank myself so Julian's ego could fill the room. When his tech startup was bleeding cash last October, he was desperate. Banks laughed at him. He was ready to file for bankruptcy. He didn't know the silent private equity firm that swooped in to save him, Apex Capital, was mine. I approved the mezzanine loan myself. I gave him a 4% interest rate when the market demanded 12. I secured it against the house and the company using my lawyer Marcus as the proxy. I did it to save his pride. I wanted a partner, not a dependent. Eleanor's voice echoed in my memory, cutting through the hum of the tires. "Look at yourself. Living off my son's hard work, and you can't even manage to look presentable for dinner." My mother-in-law had sneered at my worn coat just last month. I had bitten my tongue. I swallowed the insult because arguing felt pointless when I secretly held the deed to the roof over her head. The lift turned onto our street. The manicured lawns of our suburban neighborhood looked exactly as I left them. I tipped the driver, grabbed the heavy diaper bag, and carried Leo up the concrete steps of our porch. The wind howled, biting through my thin sweater. I shifted Leo's weight and dug into my purse. My fingers were stiff from the cold as I pulled out my house key. I slid the familiar brass key into the deadbolt. It went in halfway, then stopped. I frowned. I pulled it out and pushed it in again. I jiggled the handle. I pushed harder, my knuckles turning white. The key wouldn't turn. The pins inside the lock didn't align. I took a step back. I looked closer at the metal fixture. It was shiny. There were fresh scratches on the wooden doorframe. The lock had been changed. A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over me. Not panic. Just a cold, sharp clarity. I pulled out my phone with a trembling hand. I dialed Julian's number. 1 ring, 2 rings. Then the sharp automated click of a disconnected line. I stood on my own front porch, shivering in the wind, listening to the soulless beep of his voicemail. I pressed the redial button. The wind whipped my hair across my face. Leo stirred against my chest, letting out a soft, reedy whimper. I rocked him gently, keeping the phone pressed to my ear. Finally, the line clicked open. "Clara, I can't talk right now," Julian whispered. His voice was rushed. "Hush. I'm standing on our front porch," I said. The cold made my teeth chatter, but I forced the words out clear and sharp. "My key doesn't work. The lock is different." There was a 3-second pause. I heard the faint sound of a vacuum cleaner running in the background. "Oh, right," Julian said. He cleared his throat. "Listen, take a cab to your mom's or a hotel for a few weeks. My mother has a terrible migraine. She's really sick, Clara. She can't handle a crying baby right now." I blinked. The words hung in the freezing air, absurd and heavy. "I just had surgery, Julian. I just gave birth to your son. You locked me out of our house because your mother has a headache." "Don't be dramatic," he snapped. The hushed tone vanished, replaced by irritation. "I transferred $500 to your checking account. Go get a nice room. We'll talk later. I have a massive meeting." The line went dead. I pulled the phone away and stared at the dark screen. $500. The cost of displacing his newborn son. I didn't scream. I didn't pound my fists against the heavy oak door. I turned around, walked down the concrete steps, and ordered another lift. 20 minutes later, I was sitting on the edge of a sagging bed in a cheap roadside motel. The air smelled of stale bleach and old cigarette smoke. The heater in the corner rattled, pushing out weak bursts of lukewarm air. I laid Leo on a clean towel over the scratchy bedspread and changed his diaper. He fell back asleep, completely unaware that his father had just banished him. I sat in the dim light of the bedside lamp. My physical pain was a dull, constant throb, but my mind was racing. Julian's excuse was pathetic. Eleanor complained about her health constantly, but Julian had never cared enough to change a lock over a headache. And the vacuum cleaner in the background. Julian hated vacuuming. Eleanor hired a maid service for that. Something was wrong. I grabbed my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. Last year, when I set up the smart home system, I registered the Ring doorbell to my old personal email address. Julian had forgotten all about it when he took over the primary account. I opened the app. The live feed buffered for a second, then cleared. The wide-angle lens showed our front porch illuminated by the warm glow of the exterior lights. It was evening now. I watched as our front door opened from the inside. Julian stepped out. He was wearing a navy blue tailored suit. The exact suit he bought last month using the company credit card, the company I was secretly keeping afloat. His hair was perfectly styled. Eleanor stepped out behind him. She wore a pearl necklace and a velvet blazer. She looked nothing like a woman suffering from a debilitating migraine. She looked like she was hosting a gala. A sleek black town car pulled into our driveway. The driver got out and opened the rear door. An older man with silver hair stepped out first, adjusting his tie. Then he reached back and offered his hand to a young woman. She was stunning. Early 20s, dressed in a designer silk dress and an expensive wool coat. Julian walked down the steps, a wide, dazzling smile plastered across his face. He shook the older man's hand vigorously. "Mr. Sterling, Chloe, please come in," Julian said. The camera's microphone picked up his voice perfectly. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the open door. "Excuse the mess, you know how it is for a single guy living alone." A single guy. Living alone. Eleanor stepped forward, clasping her hands together in a display of pure, manufactured warmth. "Oh, Arthur, it's so good to see you after all these years. And Chloe, you are just as beautiful as your father promised. Julian works too hard on his startup to decorate properly, but we make do." The young woman, Chloe, giggled. She touched Julian's arm lightly as she walked past him into my house, into the home I paid the mortgage for. The front door clicked shut. The porch was empty again. I sat perfectly still on the edge of the motel bed. The rattling heater suddenly sounded very loud. A tear didn't fall. My sadness had evaporated, burned away by a sudden intense heat in my chest. They hadn't just locked me out. They had erased me. I looked down at the sleeping baby beside me. Then I looked back at the frozen frame of Julian smiling on my phone screen. A single guy, I thought. We'll see about that. I didn't sleep a single minute that night. The cheap motel heater rattled until dawn. When the gray morning light crept through the thin curtains, I made my decision. I wasn't going to hide in a roadside room while my husband played house with a billionaire's daughter. I packed the diaper bag, bundled Leo into his carrier, and ordered another ride. At 8:30 in the morning, I stood on my own front porch again. I didn't bother testing the lock this time. I balled my hand into a fist and pounded on the heavy oak door. I hit it hard enough to rattle the glass panes. Footsteps echoed inside. The deadbolt clicked. Eleanor opened the door. She was wearing a pristine cream-colored cashmere sweater. Her face was set in a polite, host-ready smile. The moment she saw me, the smile shattered. Her eyes went wide. "Clara!" she hissed, glancing frantically over her shoulder. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer. I shoved my shoulder past her, forcing my way into the foyer. The smell of expensive French roast coffee filled the air. I didn't buy that brand. I walked straight into the living room, the heavy car seat swinging against my leg. Julian was sitting on my expensive linen sofa. He was wearing a casual but immaculate button-down shirt. Sitting right next to him, holding a delicate porcelain teacup, was Chloe Sterling. Julian looked up. All the color drained from his face. For a split second, I saw raw, unadulterated panic in his eyes. But Julian had always been a fast talker. The panic vanished, replaced instantly by a mask of weary sorrow. He stood up abruptly and stepped in front of Chloe, shielding her from me. "Julian," I said. My voice was deceptively calm. "What is going on here?" Chloe lowered her teacup. Her perfectly manicured eyebrows pulled together in confusion. "Julian, who is this?" Julian let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. He turned slightly toward the younger woman, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "Chloe, please don't be frightened," he said, his voice dripping with practiced pity. "This is Clara. She's my delusional ex-girlfriend. She's been stalking me." The room went dead silent. I stared at the man I had married, the man I had just given birth for, the man whose failing company I was quietly keeping alive. He didn't even blink. He looked at me like I was a stranger who had wandered in from the street. Chloe gasped softly. Her eyes dropped to the infant carrier in my hand. "Oh my God. Is that a baby?" "She claims it's mine?" Julian lied smoothly, shaking his head. "It's a tragic situation. She refuses to accept that we're over." A hot, violent rage spiked in my chest. I opened my mouth to speak, to scream the truth, to tear his meticulously crafted reality to shreds. Before the first word left my lips, long fingernails dug into my upper arm. Eleanor had come up behind me. Her grip was like a vice. "I am so sorry, Chloe," Eleanor said loudly, offering a flawless, apologetic smile. "I'll handle this poor girl." "Julian, pour Chloe some more tea." Eleanor didn't give me a chance to brace myself. She yanked me backward with surprising strength, dragging me out of the living room and down the hall. She pushed me into the laundry room and slammed the door shut, locking us in the cramped space. The polite society matron was gone, the mask completely dropped. Eleanor pinned me against the washing machine. Her face was inches from mine. Her eyes were dark and cold. "Listen to me, you ungrateful little tramp," she hissed, her voice barely a whisper. "Arthur Sterling is worth $900 million. He's looking for a young, successful single CEO to marry his daughter. Julian is going to be that man." I clutched the car seat closer to my chest. Leo let out a soft cry, disturbed by the sudden movement. "I am his wife," I said quietly. Eleanor let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Not for long. If you open your mouth, if you ruin this for him, I promise you I will destroy you." She leaned closer. I could smell the strong mint on her breath. "I will hire the best family lawyers in this state," Eleanor threatened, spacing out every word. "I will prove to a judge that you are a penniless, unstable postpartum mess. We will take that boy from you, Clara. You will never see him again." A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just a threat, it was a strategy. If I screamed now, if I caused a scene in the living room, Chloe would call the police. The cops would arrive to find a hysterical, weeping woman claiming to be a wife, while Julian and Eleanor calmly played the victims. There would be a police report, a documented incident of my instability. They were weaponizing my grief against me. I looked down at Eleanor's manicured hand still digging into my arm. Then I looked up at her face. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just stared at her until her mocking smile faltered. I yanked my arm free. I didn't say a single word. I turned around, unlocked the laundry room door, and walked out. I walked right past the living room, ignoring Julian's tense posture and Chloe's staring eyes. I walked out the front door and let it click shut behind me. I stood on the sidewalk, the cold wind hitting my face again. I strapped Leo back into the lift that was waiting for me. Eleanor thought she had won. She thought the threat of expensive lawyers and poverty would keep me quiet. "You're right, Eleanor," I thought, pulling my phone out of my pocket. "A judge won't believe a penniless woman. Luckily, I'm not her." I found Marcus's number in my contacts and pressed call. It was time to stop playing the wife. It was time to be the bank. The law offices of Castellano and Associates occupied the 14th floor of a glass building downtown. The receptionist offered a sympathetic smile when I walked in, carrying the bulky infant car seat, but I just nodded and headed straight for the corner office. Marcus was already waiting at the door. He was a 50-year-old corporate attorney with sharp eyes and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. He was also the only person on Earth who knew I was the sole proprietor of Apex Capital. On every public document, Marcus was listed as the managing director. I was a ghost. I set Leo's carrier gently on the plush rug. My legs were shaking. I sank into one of the leather guest chairs. Marcus poured a glass of ice water and slid it across the mahogany desk. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't ask how my delivery went. He looked at my pale face and the worn duffel bag slung over my shoulder. "Tell me what happened," Marcus said, sitting down. I took a sip of the cold water. My throat felt like sandpaper. "Julian changed the locks while I was at the hospital," I said flatly. "He told me to go to a hotel. When I went back this morning, he was hosting Arthur Sterling and his daughter." Marcus raised a silver eyebrow. "Arthur Sterling, the telecommunications billionaire." I nodded. "Julian introduced me as his delusional ex-girlfriend." Eleanor backed him up. "They threatened to drag me through family court and take Leo if I ruined Julian's chance to marry Chloe Sterling." Marcus didn't gasp. He didn't express outrage. He simply turned to his dual monitors and started typing. The rapid clacking of his keyboard filled the quiet office. "Julian is trying to secure Series A funding to save his startup," Marcus said, his eyes scanning a digital document. "And he's using the house and his company as proof of his success to court Sterling." "Exactly," I said. "He's putting on a show, the self-made successful single CEO." Marcus clicked his mouse, pulling up the master file for the mezzanine loan Apex Capital had issued to Julian 10 months ago. The loan that kept him out of bankruptcy court. "Let's review the covenants of his loan agreement," Marcus murmured, tracing a line of text with his pen. He stopped. A slow, sharp smile spread across his face. He spun the monitor around so I could see it. He pointed to Section 8, Paragraph 4. "He's using secured collateral to solicit new investment without disclosure." Marcus asked, his tone shifting to pure clinical precision. "Clara, this is a material breach of contract." I leaned forward. The legal jargon was dense, but I knew the structure of the debt I had issued. If a borrower attempts to pledge or leverage secured assets for new capital without written consent from the lien holder, Marcus explained, tapping the screen, it triggers the acceleration clause. "Which means," I asked, though I already knew the answer. I just needed to hear my lawyer confirm it. "Which means," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, "Apex Capital has the legal right to call the entire $1.2 million loan due immediately. If he cannot produce the cash within 48 hours of the notice, we execute the foreclosure." We seized the company, IP, the operational accounts, and the deed to the house. A strange, heavy quiet settled over me. For the past 24 hours, I had felt entirely powerless. I had stood on a freezing porch. I had been dragged into a laundry room and threatened with the loss of my child. But sitting in this chair looking at the black and white ink of a legally binding contract, the power shifted. Julian thought he was playing a brilliant game of chess. He didn't realize I owned the board. "Draft the default notice," I said. My voice didn't shake anymore. Marcus picked up a legal pad. "I can have the papers served to him by tomorrow morning. A process server can walk right up to his front door." "No," I said quickly. I looked down at Leo. He was sleeping so peacefully, entirely unaware of the storm brewing around him. "If we serve him now, he'll scramble. He'll try to negotiate. Or worse, Eleanor will make good on her threat and file an emergency custody order to bleed me dry in court before the default goes through." Marcus paused, his pen hovering over the paper. "Then what's your play?" "Julian will want to sever our legal ties quickly and quietly before Sterling's lawyers start looking too closely at his background," I said, thinking of Eleanor's desperate manicured grip on my arm. "He's going to send me divorce papers. He's going to try to force me to walk away with nothing." I reached into my bag and pulled out my driver's license, tossing it onto the desk. "Draft the foreclosure papers, Marcus. Get the injunctions ready to freeze his corporate accounts. But hold them." I met my lawyer's sharp gaze. "Let him send the divorce papers first. Let him think I surrendered." The sharp chime of my phone broke the heavy silence of the motel room. It was Tuesday afternoon. Rain was drumming against the thin glass of the window, blurring the neon vacancy sign across the parking lot. I picked up the device from the nightstand. A new email sat at the top of my inbox. The sender was Julian. The subject line read, "Dissolution of marriage, preliminary agreement." A second notification popped up immediately after. A text message from him. "Sign it, and I'll give you a small allowance. Don't make this hard. You don't have the money to fight me in court." I swiped the message away and opened the PDF. It was a standard fast-track divorce template. He hadn't even bothered to hire a premium firm. He wanted this done quietly and quickly, probably hoping to have a clean, legally unencumbered status before Arthur Sterling's lawyers did any deep background checks for the merger. I scrolled through the pages, reading the terms he had filled in. The sheer audacity of his demands was almost breathtaking. Under the division of assets, Julian claimed sole ownership of the 4-bedroom house on Maple Drive. He retained 100% equity in his startup Vertex Solutions. He kept both vehicles. In exchange for my absolute surrender of all marital property, Julian graciously granted me full physical custody of Leo. There was a brief clause waiving formal child support. Instead, it stipulated that Julian would provide a discretionary, unofficial allowance, the exact amount left entirely up to his goodwill. He was legally stripping me to the bone. He thought I was a terrified, unemployed mother hiding in a cheap motel, too exhausted from childbirth to put up a fight. Eleanor's threat in the laundry room was the setup. This contract was the execution. I didn't cry. My pulse didn't even spike. I stared at the glowing screen, watching Julian tighten the noose around his own neck. By demanding sole ownership of the house and the company, he was legally assuming sole liability for the assets. He didn't realize that those assets were currently collateral for a $1.2 million mezzanine loan from Apex Capital. A loan that was about to go into default because he was using that exact same collateral to solicit the Sterling family's investment without the lien holder's permission. If I fought him for half the company, I would technically share the liability of his breach. But if I walked away with 0%, the default and the catastrophic financial fallout would rest entirely on his shoulders. I picked up the room key and walked down to the motel lobby. The front desk clerk, a college kid wearing headphones, let me use the communal business center. The ancient laser printer hummed and clicked slowly, spitting out the 12 pages of the divorce agreement. The paper was still warm when I pulled it from the tray. I sat at the sticky laminate table. I didn't read through it a second time. I took a cheap blue ballpoint pen from a plastic cup on the desk. I flipped to the last page. I signed my name on the line marked Respondent. I initialed every waiver. I signed away the house. I signed away the startup. I legally agreed to leave the marriage with nothing but the clothes in my duffel bag and the baby sleeping upstairs. I fed the pages through the lobby scanner, emailing the signed PDF directly back to Julian. No counteroffers, no angry paragraphs demanding an explanation, just a swift, total capitulation. I hit send. The screen confirmed the delivery. I picked up the hard copies, tapping the edges against the desk to straighten the stack. "You just cut your last lifeline, Julian," I whispered to the empty room. I walked back up the outdoor stairs to my room. The rain was freezing, but I didn't feel the cold. I sat on the edge of the bed and forwarded the signed agreement to Marcus. A minute later, Marcus texted back, "Received." He took the bait. "The default notice is ready." I looked down at Leo. He was stretching his tiny fists in his sleep. Julian thought he was getting rid of a burden. He thought he was clearing the runway for his new glamorous life with Chloe Sterling. He had no idea he had just handed me the match to burn his entire world to the ground. By Thursday morning, I had moved out of the roadside motel and into a short-term apartment rental across town. It was small, with scuffed hardwood floors and a humming refrigerator, but it was safe. It was mine. I set up a portable crib for Leo in the corner of the living room. Then I opened my laptop on the tiny kitchen island. My screen was split. On the left half, a secure video call with Marcus. On the right, the public Facebook profile of Eleanor Mercer. "The judge expedited the divorce decree because you contested absolutely nothing," Marcus said through the laptop speakers. He held up a thick manila folder. "Julian is officially the sole owner of the house and Vertex Solutions. He carries 100% of the liability." "And the default notice?" I asked, typing Eleanor's name into the search bar. "Printed and notarized," Marcus confirmed. "The injunctions are filed under seal, all set. His corporate accounts freeze the second this is served." I nodded slowly. The trap was set. Now I just needed the perfect moment to spring it. I hit refresh on Eleanor's page. My mother-in-law had never been good at keeping secrets. She treated her social media like a broadcast network for her own ego, meticulously curating an image of old money wealth. A new post popped up at the top of her feed. It was a photo of massive imported white hydrangeas sitting on my quartz kitchen island. The caption read, "Preparing for a very special dinner party tomorrow night. So blessed to welcome dear friends into our home." The next chapter for Julian is going to be spectacular. Hashtag family first, hashtag new beginnings, hashtag blessed. I zoomed in on the photo. Behind the flowers, I could see the edge of a catering contract resting on the counter. The logo belonged to an exclusive French catering service downtown. They charged a minimum of $200 a plate. Julian's startup was running on fumes, which meant he was putting this entire lavish display on his business credit cards. Cards that were backed by my loan. He was using my money to buy the rope to hang himself. "Marcus," I said, leaning closer to the microphone, "what time are the process servers available tomorrow evening?" Marcus checked his watch. "Standard hours end at 5, but for a premium fee I can have a private courier deliver documents anywhere at any time." "Book them for 7:30 tomorrow night," I instructed. I looked back at the photo of the white hydrangeas. 7:30 was the sweet spot. It was late enough that Arthur and Chloe Sterling would already be seated with a glass of expensive wine in hand. The small talk would be over. The real business, the investment pitch, and the engagement hints would be in full swing. 7:30 it is," Marcus said, making a note. "Do you want me to send a police escort to keep the peace?" "No," I replied smoothly. "Just you, the courier, and the paperwork." I don't want Julian to have any excuse to claim harassment. I want this to be purely business. We disconnected the call. The apartment fell quiet save for the soft, rhythmic breathing of Leo sleeping in his crib. I closed the laptop and walked over to the small rolling closet in the corner. When Julian had locked me out, I had only a duffel bag of baby clothes and my hospital sweatpants. But earlier that morning, I had taken a trip to a boutique downtown. I unzipped the black garment bag hanging on the rack. Inside was a tailored navy blue wool suit. Crisp, structured, intimidating. It wasn't the pastel cardigans or the sensible beige slacks I used to wear when I played the role of Julian's mousy, supportive wife. I ran my fingers over the sharp lapel. For 3 years, I had hidden my success. I had downplayed my title and managed my private equity firm from a home office, all to protect Julian's fragile masculinity. I let him play the brilliant CEO while I quietly paid the bills. I let Eleanor treat me like a charity case because the truth would have bruised her son's ego. Never again. I checked my watch. 28 hours left. Julian thought he was throwing a celebration tomorrow night. He thought he had successfully erased his wife's stolen a house and secured a billionaire's daughter to fund his failing company. I zipped the garment bag closed. Tomorrow at 7:30, the single guy living alone was going to meet the bank. Friday evening arrived with a biting clear chill. The rain from earlier in the week had completely washed away, leaving the suburban streets of Maple Drive slick and reflective under the amber glow of the streetlights. It was 6:45. I was sitting in the back of a black Lincoln Navigator parked 2 houses down from my own driveway. Marcus sat in the passenger seat up front. Next to him in the driver's seat was a quiet, broad-shouldered man named Vance, a private process courier who specialized in high-stakes corporate foreclosures. My mother had driven down from out of state to watch Leo at the apartment. I needed to be entirely focused. I needed both hands free. I had an iPad resting on my lap, streaming the live feed from my front porch camera. The house was blazing with light. Julian had hired a landscaping crew to put fresh mulch in the flower beds just that morning. A sleek white catering van from Le Petit Chef was idling in the driveway, its crew rushing silver warming trays up the front steps. Julian was bleeding his corporate accounts, dry pulling cash advances against the company credit cards to fund a 5-course French dinner. At 7 o'clock, Eleanor stepped out onto the front porch. She was holding a crystal wine glass filled to the brim with expensive Chardonnay. She wore a tailored emerald green cocktail dress that she had undoubtedly charged to Julian's account. She held her cell phone to her ear, speaking loudly enough for the microphone on the doorbell camera to pick up every single word. "Oh, it's just an intimate little dinner, Susan," Eleanor boasted to whoever was on the other end of the line. She took a sip of her wine, her diamond earrings catching the porch light. "Arthur Sterling and his daughter, Chloe." "Yes, that's Sterling." A pause as she listened to her friend. Eleanor let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Please, we don't even say her name anymore." Eleanor sneered, pacing across the stone tiles. Julian should have married a high society girl a long time ago, not gotten tied down by some penniless nobody. The girl was completely unstable. She practically begged for the divorce just to run away from her responsibilities. Julian is finally free to step into the life he deserves. I watched the screen, my face perfectly still. A penniless nobody. Unstable. 3 days ago, those words would have stung. Now they were just background noise. They were the desperate fictions of a woman who built her entire identity on a house of cards I had financed. At 7:15, a charcoal gray Bentley glided smoothly up the street and pulled into our driveway right behind the catering van. Julian burst out of the front door before the driver even had a chance to put the car in park. He was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit, his hair swept back, looking every inch the young, successful tech visionary he desperately pretended to be. Arthur Sterling stepped out of the Bentley, buttoning his jacket. Julian bounded down the steps, shaking the billionaire's hand with both of his. Then Julian turned to Chloe. She was draped in a designer wool coat, smiling radiantly as Julian leaned in to kiss her cheek. They looked like a magazine cover. The wealthy investor, the brilliant entrepreneur, and the beautiful heiress. Welcome, welcome. Julian's voice echoed through the iPad speakers, rich with fake humility. Come inside, the chef is just finishing up the appetizers. They walked up the steps, Eleanor greeting them with open arms. The heavy oak door closed behind them, cutting off the audio feed. I stared at the frozen image of the closed door for a long moment. Then I closed the iPad cover. It made a sharp, definitive snap in the quiet SUV. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. 7:28 p.m. I smoothed my hands down the thighs of my crisp navy blue suit. I wore a pair of black leather pumps. No jewelry. No makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes. I didn't need to look pretty. I needed to look exactly like what I was, a corporate creditor about to collect a debt. Marcus, I said quietly. Marcus turned around in the passenger seat. He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't ask how I felt. He simply nodded and picked up a thick leather-bound legal folder from the console. Vance, Marcus said to the courier, we're up. The three of us stepped out of the SUV. The cold air hit my face, but my blood was pumping hot and fast. I walked up the sidewalk of Maple Drive, my heels clicking a sharp rhythmic cadence against the concrete. I walked past the manicured lawn. I walked past the catering van. Through the sheer curtains of the dining room window, I could see them. The crystal glasses were raised in a toast. Julian was smiling, his teeth flashing in the warm light of the chandelier. I stepped onto the porch. I didn't reach for my keys. I didn't have them anymore. I reached out and pressed the doorbell. The sharp chime of the doorbell cut through the faint sound of classical music drifting from the dining room. I waited. 10 seconds later, the heavy oak door swung open. Julian stood there, a practiced, charming smile already painted on his face, a linen napkin still clutched in one hand. When he saw me standing under the porch light wearing a tailored navy suit instead of my hospital sweats, the smile didn't just fade, it snapped. Clara! He hissed, his eyes darting frantically to Marcus and Vance standing behind me. What the hell are you doing here? Are you out of your mind? He reached out to grab my arm and shove me back out into the cold. I didn't flinch. Vance, the broad-shouldered process server, stepped smoothly between us, forcing Julian to drop his hand and take a step back. Excuse us, I said, my voice cold and level. I walked past him, stepping into the warm, brightly lit foyer. The smell of roasted duck and red wine hung heavily in the air. I walked straight toward the dining room. Julian scrambled behind me, his dress shoes slipping on the hardwood floor in his panic. Clara, stop, he demanded in a harsh whisper. I will call the police, I swear to God. I ignored him. I stepped into the archway of the formal dining room. Arthur Sterling sat at the head of the table. Chloe sat to his right, and Eleanor sat to his left. The table was covered in fine china crystal wine glasses and silver platters. Eleanor was in the middle of a sentence. When she saw me, her mouth hung open. The crystal wine glass in her hand tilted dangerously, spilling a few drops of Chardonnay onto the pristine white tablecloth. Julian! Eleanor shrieked, her host mask completely vaporizing. Get this crazy woman out of my house right now, call security. Arthur Sterling set his fork down. The billionaire looked at me, then at the two men standing behind me, his expression hardening into quiet, observant caution. Julian, what is going on? Chloe asked, her voice high and nervous. Is this that girl again? Julian lunged forward, trying to block their view of me. He held his hands up in a placating gesture. Arthur, Chloe, I am so sorry. This is the woman I told you about. She's unwell. She's stalking me. Please just give me 1 minute to have her removed. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I reached into the inside pocket of my blazer, pulled out a folded piece of heavy stock paper, and tossed it onto the center of the dining table. It landed right next to Arthur Sterling's plate. I'm not his ex-girlfriend, I said clearly. The room went dead silent. That is our certified marriage license. We share a newborn son, and as of yesterday we are officially divorced. Chloe gasped, shrinking back in her chair. Arthur Sterling didn't gasp. He didn't look at Julian. He picked up the piece of paper put on his reading glasses and scanned the state seal. His jaw tightened. You lied to me, Sterling said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the heavy, dangerous weight of a man who could destroy lives with a phone call. Arthur, please, let me explain, Julian stammered. Sweat broke out on his forehead. We were separated. The marriage was over long before I met Chloe. I didn't want to complicate the investment talks with messy family drama. It's about to get much messier, I interrupted. Julian spun around to face me, his face twisting with pure, unadulterated hatred. He had lost his temper entirely. You stupid, vindictive bitch, he spat, pointing a shaking finger at my face. You signed the papers. You walked away with nothing. I own this house. I own the company. You have absolutely no right to be here. You're right, Julian, I said smoothly. You do own it. All of it. Which makes you solely liable for the debt. Julian froze. His extended finger slowly lowered. The anger in his eyes flickered, replaced by a sudden creeping confusion. What debt? I stepped aside, gesturing to my lawyer. Marcus stepped forward. He placed the thick, leather-bound folder onto the dining table right on top of Eleanor's spilled wine. Mr. Mercer, Marcus said, his voice ringing with absolute clinical authority. I am the managing director of Apex Capital. 10 months ago, we issued your company a $1.2 million mezzanine loan secured by the deed to this house and the intellectual property of Vertex Solutions. Julian stared at Marcus. I know who you are. I make the interest payments every month. I haven't missed a dime. You can't touch me. Under Section 8 of your loan covenant, Marcus continued, completely ignoring Julian's protest. Using secured collateral to solicit new capital without the lien holder's consent constitutes a material breach of contract. By bringing Mr. Sterling here to pitch an equity stake in Vertex, you triggered the default clause. The blood completely drained from Julian's face. He looked like he had been struck by lightning. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Eleanor grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. This is ridiculous, Julian. Call your lawyers. They can't do this. They already did, Eleanor, I said. I looked at Julian. He was staring at the legal folder as if it were a bomb about to detonate. I didn't come here to fight over a worthless man, I said. My voice was quiet, but it commanded every corner of the room. I am the CEO of Apex Capital. I'm here to foreclose on this house. Julian's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of Chloe's empty chair to keep from collapsing onto the floor. His eyes darted from Marcus to me, the horrific realization finally connecting in his brain. The quiet wife, the cheap clothes, the sudden anonymous private equity bailout. You, Julian whispered, his voice cracking. He looked at me as if he were seeing a ghost. It was you, the loan. It was your money. And now you're out of it, I replied. Marcus tapped the folder. Pursuant to the default clause, all corporate accounts have been frozen as of 6 o'clock this evening. All secured assets are hereby seized. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of an entire fake empire crashing to the ground. Arthur Sterling broke the silence. He didn't yell. He didn't flip the table. He calmly reached up, removed his reading glasses, and folded them into his breast pocket. Then he picked up his linen napkin, wiped his mouth, and tossed it onto his plate of untouched duck l'orange. My team spent 3 weeks conducting preliminary due diligence on Vertex Solutions, Sterling said. His voice was dangerously quiet, cutting through the dining room like a scalpel. You presented your intellectual property and this property as unencumbered assets. You falsified your financial disclosures, Mr. Mercer. That is corporate fraud. Julian threw his hands up, his chest heaving. Arthur, no. You don't understand. The IP is still mine. The algorithm works. We can restructure the deal. I can file an injunction against her. Restructure. Sterling let out a short, humorless laugh. He pushed his chair back and stood up. Did you think the Sterling family were fools, Julian? That we would let a couple of pretentious frauds use us for a bailout? Chloe stood up immediately, her face flushed with humiliation. She didn't look at Julian with heartbreak. She looked at him with absolute visceral disgust. Don't ever contact me again, Julian. Chloe said, her voice shaking with anger. She grabbed her designer wool coat from the back of her chair. Let's go, Dad. Arthur, wait, please. Julian scrambled around the table, practically tripping over the expensive Persian rug. He reached out to grab the billionaire's arm. Sterling turned, his eyes flashing with a sudden, terrifying authority. Touch me, and my lawyers will make sure you spend the next 10 years in federal prison instead of just bankruptcy court. Back away. Julian froze, his hand suspended in midair. Sterling and his daughter walked past me without a second glance. The heavy oak front door opened and then slammed shut. The sound echoed through the foyer, signaling the absolute end of Julian's pathetic charade. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Julian stood frozen in the middle of the dining room. Slowly, he turned his head to look at me. The arrogant, charming tech CEO was completely gone. In his place was a terrified, desperate boy whose toys had just been taken away. Clara, he whispered, his voice cracking. He took a hesitant step toward me. Clara, baby, listen to me. We can fix this. I didn't mean any of that stuff in the divorce papers. I was just stressed. The investors were pressuring me. You know I love you. You know I love Leo. I felt my stomach turn. It was incredible how easily the lies spilled from his mouth, even now standing in the ashes of his own greed. I didn't step back. I just stared at him with cold, dead eyes. You locked your 3-day-old son out in the freezing wind so you could buy white hydrangeas for another woman. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Don't ever say his name again. Julian, do something. Eleanor suddenly shrieked. She was still sitting at the table, her hands trembling so violently that the silverware rattled against the china. Her perfect hair was slightly messy. The illusion of the grand society matron had completely dissolved. Call the police, Eleanor demanded, pointing a shaking finger at me. Tell them she's trespassing. Tell them she forged those documents. We are not losing this house. Julian spun around to face his mother. The desperation in his eyes instantly morphed into explosive, venomous rage. Do something, Julian roared. The veins in his neck bulged. This is your fault. You told me to change the locks. You told me to tell her you had a migraine so she'd go to her mother's. I was trying to help you. Eleanor screamed back, slamming her hands flat against the table. I was securing your future. I found Arthur Sterling. I set up the introduction. And you told me she was too stupid to fight back, Julian yelled, stepping toward her. He pointed a finger furiously at Eleanor's face. You told me she was just a pathetic, penniless secretary. You told me to rush the divorce so the Sterlings wouldn't find out. Don't you dare blame me for your incompetence. Eleanor shrieked, her face turning an ugly mottled red. You're the CEO. You're the one who signed away the marital rights without even reading the fine print. You handed her everything because you were too busy trying to impress a 22-year-old girl. Because you pushed me to do it? Julian shouted, grabbing his own hair in frustration. You ruined my life. You cost me my company. They were screaming over each other now, their voices bouncing off the high ceilings, echoing with decades of toxic, selfish entitlement. They were tearing each other to shreds, stripping away the thin veneer of family loyalty to reveal the ugly, greedy core beneath. I stood in the archway watching them. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I just felt incredibly, overwhelmingly tired of them. I looked at Marcus. He gave me a brief professional nod. He had left the foreclosure documents on the table right next to the spilled wine and the ruined dinner. The legal trap was sprung. There was nothing left for me to do here. I turned my back on the dining room. I walked through the foyer, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. I opened the front door and stepped out into the crisp, cold night air. The catering van was already packing up to leave. The charcoal gray Bentley was long gone. I walked down the concrete steps, pulling my coat a little tighter around myself. Behind me, the muffled sound of Julian and Eleanor screaming at each other bled through the heavy oak door. I didn't look back. I just walked toward the waiting SUV, toward my son, and toward the rest of my life. 6 months later, the warm May sunshine poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office. I sat at my glass desk reviewing a quarterly portfolio report. A few feet away, Leo was sitting on a padded playmat, happily chewing on a silicone teething ring. He was bigger now, healthy, and completely oblivious to the hurricane that had briefly touched his first few days of life. There was a light knock on the open door. Marcus walked in, holding a single manila folder and a cup of coffee. He set the coffee on my desk and tossed the folder next to it. "The Maple Drive property officially closed this morning," Marcus said, taking a seat in one of the guest chairs. "We recovered the principal of the loan plus the penalty interest. The books on Vertex Solutions are officially closed." I picked up my coffee, taking a slow sip. "And Julian," Marcus gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "Arthur Sterling's legal team is systematically dismantling him. The civil fraud suit drained whatever cash he had left. I heard he's working the floor at an electronics retail store 2 towns over just to pay his legal retainer." I looked out the window at the bustling city skyline. I didn't feel a rush of vindictive joy. I just felt a quiet, profound relief. Eleanor hadn't fared much better. When the foreclosure hit the public records, her carefully constructed high society image shattered overnight. The country club revoked her membership due to unpaid dues. Without Julian's corporate card to fund her lifestyle, she was forced to move out of her upscale rental and into a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a less desirable zip code. Her wealthy friends, the ones she had bragged to on my front porch, stopped returning her calls completely. My cell phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting my thoughts. I glanced at the screen. It was an unsaved number, but the area code was familiar. I didn't answer it. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. A minute later, the transcription popped up on my screen. I pressed play anyway, curious to hear the tone. "Clara, it's me." Julian's voice drifted from the phone speaker. He sounded exhausted. His voice was thick, like he had been crying. "I know you blocked my other numbers. Please just listen. I made a mistake. A massive, stupid mistake. My mom, she got in my head. I have nothing left, Clara. I miss you. I miss my son. Please just let me see him. Let me prove I can be better." I watched Leo drop his teething ring and reach for a colorful stuffed block, letting out a happy little babble. Julian hadn't reached out because he loved me. He hadn't reached out because he missed his son. He reached out because his billionaire safety net had vanished, his mother had turned on him, and he realized the woman he threw away was the only one who ever truly supported him. He was cold, and he wanted back inside the house. I reached out and tapped the red trash can icon. The audio cut off instantly. Then I blocked the number. I leaned back in my chair, watching the morning light catch the dust motes dancing in the air. Some trash takes itself out. Your only job is to never open the door to let it back in. I stood up from my desk, walked over to the playmate, and scooped Leo into my arms. He giggled, grabbing a fistful of my hair. I carried him over to the window, looking down at the streets far below. I had my son. I had my company. I had my peace. And nobody was ever going to change my locks again. Julian begged for a second chance to see his son after losing absolutely everything. "If you were in my shoes, Would you have allowed him a supervised visit with the baby, or was permanently cutting him off the only right move? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of a silent creditor taking back her power, hit that subscribe button for more.